The US presidential elections may have dominated headlines in 2020, but it was a particularly landmark year in the continent of Africa, which saw national elections held in almost 20 countries.
2020, it's the start of a new decade. And for these African countries, it's also an election year.
While political clashes and terrorism continue to have a major impact, the COVID-19 pandemic posed an additional challenge, further testing the continent's domestic stability.
After originating in Asia, reaching Europe and Northern America, COVID-19 is now quickly spreading across the African continent. The number of confirmed cases in Africa shot past the 2,000 mark on Wednesday. Now, the majority of the continent's 54 countries have registered infections.
In this video, we'll delve through some of the African elections which particularly garnered attention. Let's start with Tanzania. This country, located along the east coast of Africa, is often seen as a beacon of political stability. While despite widespread poverty, the country has managed to remain one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. However, the 2020 elections were quite unbecoming of its progressive image. Incumbent President John Magufuli was re-elected for another 5 years after a landslide victory, winning 84% of the total votes. However, the US, the EU, the Commonwealth have all expressed concerns about the credibility of the results. And rightfully so, because on the eve of the election day, Tanzania witnessed large-scale internet shutdowns. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even WhatsApp were all blocked by the government. Twitter's official public policy handle even put out a tweet confirming irregularities on its platform in the country, whereas Internet Connection Observatory NetBlocks posted a web probe metrics which showed outage across various service providers such as Airtel, Halotel, Tigo, and Vodacom. Some people believe this was a strategic move by the government to control communication during the elections, even denying accreditation to foreign media. Whereas after its conclusion, the Tanzanian police also arrested several opposition leaders in an attempt to curb protests against the election outcome, including President John Magufuli's biggest rival Tundu Lissu, who was on his way back from a European Union office as he sought diplomatic protection from the clampdown. Yet, the most shocking incident to occur during this wild election period was the confiscation of a bag full of pre-filled ballots at a polling station, all voting for President Magufuli's party.
Hii ni mambo ya aibu kabisa kabisa. Hili ni boksi zaidi ya 10 yanakamatwa hapa, tuko na makamanda wanatusaidia. Hii ni aibu kubwa sana. Hii ni aibu. Tuko na makamanda hapa, lakini hii haiwezekani.
All these points clearly indicate that elections in Tanzania weren't free and fair after all. And even though President Magufuli has already been sworn in, the neighboring country of Malawi is setting a different precedent. The country held its elections 4 months before Tanzania's, but here's the catch: it was a re-election.
And in news just in, Malawi's Constitutional Court has annulled the results of the May 2019 vote that re-elected President Peter Mutharika.
The court has ordered that a new presidential vote be held within 150 days.
Let me elaborate. The original elections were held in May of 2019, which then incumbent President Peter Mutharika claimed narrowly. However, the Constitutional Court totally annulled the elections after finding irregularities in the ballots and ordered a re-election. This time, President Mutharika was defeated by opposition party leader Lazarus Chakwera, who was also his one-time ally but has since fallen out with him.
People are ready for change. The ground is ready, and we have the figures, and we're winning the election. We are fighting corruption together. I'm not going to protect nobody.
Elections do not get annulled often, and this was only the second instance of annulment in Africa, after Kenya first took the unprecedented step in 2017. This nascent trend of overturned elections is slowly emboldening prospects of democracy in the continent. And in more recent times, the likes of Niger and Central African Republic are looking at a change too. Vote counting is currently underway in Niger, which stands on the cusp of witnessing its first ever peaceful transfer of power since gaining independence in 1960. For a country that consistently ranks near the bottom of the United Nations Human Development Index and has witnessed 4 military coups in the last 60 years, that is truly an accomplishment. And it seems all the more historic when you consider that Niger has been able to carry out this exercise despite looming threats of terrorism. The West African nation has been blighted in recent times by armed insurgencies by terror groups such as Boko Haram and ISIL, among many others, from neighboring Mali, Burkina Faso and Nigeria. In fact, hundreds of civilians and soldiers were killed last year alone. However, terrorist attacks have been minimal during these elections. And despite fears of COVID-19 pandemic, about 40% of the population turned up at polling stations across the country to cast their vote. A similar spirit was shown by the people of the Central African Republic, who turned up in significant numbers for elections, despite rebel groups opening fire in some areas, including the capital city of Bangui, to scare the voters away.
According to UN officials, armed rebels seized election material, threatened and intimidated voters, and prevented several polling stations from opening. Yet as polls began to close in Bangui, there was a sense that the worst had been avoided.
And finally, we'll take a look at some of the countries which witnessed the biggest turmoil during this election period. Take a look at what happened in Guinea. The country descended into violent clashes after incumbent President Alpha Condé controversially amended the constitution at the start of 2020 to run for a third term, which he secured after alleged voter fraud. In Burkina Faso, elections went ahead despite massive instability due to violence perpetrated by insurgent groups. The situation turned so dire that the Election Commission wasn't even able to register voters from more than 17% of the country, while voting did not even take place in almost 40% of the polling stations due to security concerns and COVID-19 pandemic, disenfranchising almost 600,000 people. And then there's Ethiopia, which is currently in the midst of a brutal civil war.
Ethiopian forces have been at war with the regional government of Tigray since early November, which has led tens of thousands of refugees to flee the area.
The conflict comes down to a power struggle between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the leader of the rebellious Tigray region.
Unsurprisingly then, the government has decided to postpone the elections, which were initially supposed to be held in August 2020, but will now be held in June this year. Elections in Africa rarely happen free and fair, and even more particularly so without allegations of voter fraud or security threats, just as we saw last year. But if there's anything that the likes of Ghana and Malawi have taught us, there's still scope for democracy. And with so many more national elections coming up in 2021, the bigger question is, which way is Africa headed?